Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, wherever you are. Today we're going to talk about streamlining VMware migration to AWS and how we can get a well-architected migration solution within minutes. Quite the claim we've made there, so we're going to go through with some experts on how we're going to do that. So with me tonight is Ido Giron, sitting right next to me, and making it a transatlantic webinar from across the pond. We have Richard Nicol, Cloud Solutions Architect at NetApp, and also with vast experience in the field working with VMware customers. So we have quite a team here, and I'm Danny Tsidoni. I'll be the host tonight. A little bit before we dive in, very quick housekeeping. We have chat responders in the chat, so please, when you're posting questions, please post it in the Q&A section, and our chat responders will try to answer while we're having the webinar. At the end, we'll also have time to answer some unanswered questions, should there be any, and if there are any other questions that arise that you want to ask our experts directly. And now we may begin. So to start the journey and explaining and getting to the gist of tonight's webinar that we'll see in the demo, first of all, I want to talk about BlueXP Workload Factory for AWS, which is an optimization and automation service by NetApp, which the idea is to implement and help implement industry and vendors' best practices when it comes to designing, setting up operations and key workloads when using Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. The idea is to help deploy our asset, meaning assessing, planning, and moving, operating our data estate while it's up and running, monitoring, optimizing, automating processes, and protecting ourselves in case of any disaster that might or when it arrives, with backup solutions, restores, and out-of-the-box disaster recovery solutions. BlueXP Workload Factory has some key workloads that it specializes in. It comes to databases running on FSx for ONTAP, generative AI, and our main feature tonight, VMware, where what we offer, and we'll show it later, is to analyze the current estate, whether it be on the on-prem, building deployments, exploring saving, and provisioning the optimized storage. And when it comes to that, specifically exploring potential cost savings, automated FSx for ONTAP deployments, and accessing full sets of AWS and other advanced ONTAP features. Essentially, it allows you to get a clean start by reducing manual error-prone mistakes, helping realize cost savings, and last but not least, cut migration planning time, days to hours, and we're going to take a look at that today. And the best part is BlueXP Workload Factory is free of charge, and at least some of the features are available without giving any credentials to the AWS account to already get some values from the product. But what is I've mentioned Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. What is it? First of all, it's an AWS storage service. AWS divide their services into main categories like compute, networking, databases, machine learning, analytics, and of course, storage. The most famous and the first AWS service is Amazon S3, and there are other storage services such as Amazon EBS, EFS, and the FSx family, one of which is Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which is a fully managed native Amazon service. So it means you consume it directly from Amazon. It is an Amazon first-party service. It also it is unique by being an intelligent storage service for AWS workloads, and it has a comprehensive set of features that optimize cost performance, give us resiliency and accessibility for our data. And these derive from ONTAP. The accessibility is include file, block, and object storage, multi-protocol access to the same data sets. When it comes to resilience and protection, it comes with a multi-AZ high availability or single AZ if needed, immediate and lightweight snapshots, built-in disaster recovery based on SnapMirror, and with FSX backup, you can also back up your volumes on a remote location within your AWS account. When it comes to data security, more protecting our data from malicious activities, we can isolate data and security per tenant, meaning we can have a multi-tenant file system with single tenant security standards, having Active Directory authentication, mutable storage, and built-in malware protection. Like our VMware workloads, FSX is also built for multiple workloads and use cases. That means we can fine-tune and optimize our FSX file system to our needs. So if we want to host large data sets that are dormant most of the time and do not require performance, we can be economical with our usage. Or if we have high performance mission critical workloads that are very latency sensitive, then we can configure our FSX to support those workloads and be as performant as we need it to be. Last but not least, data mobility and copies. If we want to, and part of our change request processes, we need to have copies available at the ready. We can do that with very little money to spend with remote writable, with space saving clones. If we want to cache our data to edge locations, then FSX can help with that. And if we want to move our data around between regions, etc., we can also do that with data migration. Now that we've talked about BlueXP Workload Factory and FSX for ONTAP, I want to talk to you about the typical journey from VMware on-prem to AWS. So we have several routes, but I want to focus on 4 of them. So one which is quite common is taking our VMware workloads and translating them, converting them, quote unquote, to native compute. Means taking our VMware images and converting them to AWS native compute, to EC2s. And this is what we're going to focus on today in our demo. Another way is VMware Cloud, which is an AWS bare metal based service, today sold and managed by Broadcom. Not going to get into that too much because there have been some whispers and some murmurs about it. So we'll leave that to other webinars. You can use third-party solutions which are dependent on the different uses that you have in your on-prem. Once again, not going to get into the specifics. There are many very good vendors out there. And last but not least, we all heard about the Elastic VMware service that has been announced by AWS, but is currently on gated preview. But all these routes, essentially, you are migrating your data, and data needs to be stored somewhere. In FSX for ONTAP, with the entire set of features and the pillars that we've talked about, is in most use cases could be both economical, performant, and your go-to storage solution, whatever way you seek to go to AWS. And with that, I think it will be a good time to talk a bit about how we can help you. And for that, I'm handing over the baton to our expert, to Ido. So Ido, just quickly change who's sharing the screen and go ahead. Sure.
So thank you, Danny, and hello, everyone. Before we jump into the actual demo for Migration Advisor, I would like to spend a couple of minutes discussing the actual migration workflow of VMware workloads into native AWS. So actually, when looking into VMware workloads running in an on-premise data center or in cloud, we're talking about VMware hosted VMs consuming, at most cases, virtual disks hosted on VMware data stores, that can be hosted on VMware vSAN technology, NetApp ONTAP, or any other third-party storage. When migrating those to AWS, we need to separate between two different types of VMDKs. One of those is the OS VMDK, or the root volume for the VM, which needs to be migrated into Amazon Elastic Block Storage. The reason for that is an EC2 restriction saying that the root volume for an EC2 instance must reside on an EBS volume. The data volumes, which are at most cases larger and more demanding, can be migrated into FSx4 ONTAP and enjoy FSx4 ONTAP values and benefits. Sorry. Where do BlueXP Workload Factory come into play this migration move? So actually, with the help of BlueXP Workload Factory, you can actually design and plan such a migration play, understand what is required from your VMware perspective based on your on-premise or cloud configuration, and get a detailed migration plan highlighting the components used for the migration, the cloud storage architecture, and the potential benefits embodied in leveraging FSx4 ONTAP for your cloud storage architecture. Having said that, we can now proceed and do the demo.
Okay, so with that, let's enough talking. Let's get our hands dirty. So go ahead and share your screen.
I'll share my screen. And before I start, today's demo will be split into two parts. I will be demonstrating the Migration Advisor quick mode, and then I will hand it over to Richard Nichols to demonstrate the Migration Advisor advanced mode. So to actually access Migration Advisor, just go and log in into BlueXP Workload Factory, and from the Workload Factory lobby, locate the VMware tile, click on Assess and Plan, and select Migration to native AWS Compute. A splash screen guiding you through the high-level process of Migration Advisor and the key deliverables and benefits will be presented. You can confirm or even cancel the appearance of the splash screen in future occurrences. And to begin with, you will be presented with all the wizard faces and will be requested to select an operation mode. There are two operation modes within Migration Advisor. One is called Quick Assessment Mode, and the second one is called Detailed Planning. Quick Assessment Mode is meant for customers who are in the initial phases of their AWS journey and would like to do a very high-level assessment of their environment, which is quick and effortless. Quick mode actually leverages RVTool, which is a well-known VMware data collection framework, which is also well spread. And it's very easy to deploy RVTools in your environment and export data regarding your VMware configuration. The second mode, Detailed Planning mode, embodies more advanced semantics and more detailed data collection. It also accumulates performance data and can also accumulate long-term utilization data for the VMware environment, therefore creates a more detailed assessment, which is more suitable to later phases of your assessment journey when you're near deployment of your actual cloud solution. So let me now select Quick Mode and proceed. In Quick Mode, you'll be prompted to upload your RVTool configuration file. I'll just upload my file. Following upload of the file, Migration Advisor goes ahead and iterates on the VM inventory provided to him and provides some details on the overall VM inventory, the VM power state, and the storage allocation semantics, how much provisioned capacity and utilized capacity I have for customers who would like to do some right sizing before they migrate to AWS. The users are then prompted to select their deployment region. Reason for asking deployment region, sorry about that. Reason for selecting a deployment region is that FSx for ONTAP comes in different flavors in different regions. Different generations of FSx for ONTAP are available in different AWS regions, and different SKUs and throughput capacities are also available in different regions. By selecting the region, you allow Migration Advisor to actually align the assessment created with the deployment region. In addition, you'll be prompted to provide an estimate on most of your VM performance. The default setting here is suitable to 90% of the cases, and it provides VMs with very wide performance spectrum, and we will go for the default. There are additional properties to be set, such as the storage allocation mode, data reduction level, and capacity headroom. I leave those to Richard to elaborate further on the advanced flow. Next step in the scope step, you will be requested to define your VM migration scope. By default, all power-on VMs will be considered for AWS migration, and user can then select and unselect additional VMs into the architecture. We'll now leave the default configuration and continue, and we'll move to the volume classification phase. At the volume classification phase, Migration Advisor will actually review the VM estate and the underlying VMDK configuration, and will generate a configuration of cloud storage volumes to be deployed in AWS. As mentioned previously, root volumes for all EC2 instances, target EC2 instances, must reside on EBS storage, and therefore they're assigned with EBS GP3 volumes at that phase. GP3 is actually the best practice for assignment of root volumes. All data volumes discovered in this configuration are actually assigned to FSx for ONTAP and get allocated with an adequate storage class within FSx for ONTAP. As of the quick flow, we do uniform storage class allocation, and we're using what we call a standard volume storage class, which is suitable to most use cases in AWS. Richard will also elaborate further on storage classes and what are the actual semantics of storage class allocation when he discusses advanced mode. Also, you can see the overall provision capacity, and you can drill down and get a detailed view of all the volumes selected for migration to FSx for ONTAP, all of your data volumes, and all of the source volumes to be migrated to EBS. When we are good, our configuration, we can go ahead and proceed to the package step. In the package step, the actual volume configuration classified on the last step is packaged into FSx for ONTAP instances. One or more instances might be required. At our specific example, we can package everything into a single FSx for ONTAP instance, and we can see the overall capacity allocation for this instance, be it the utilized capacity, the actual free space, headroom capacity we take into play to make this configuration production deployable, and the overall logical capacity. One can also drill down into the capacity semantics and understand some additional details on potential FSx for ONTAP cost savings due to the several space-saving mechanisms Richard is going to elaborate on, and some additional allocation details. One can also drill down into the actual FSx for ONTAP instance and view the actual volume allocation scheme. Once we are done with the package step, we can go ahead and proceed into the review plan phase. In the review plan phase, we actually get our finalized migration plan, and we can look at the detailed cost comparison done between the proposed migration plan, which involves FSx for ONTAP used for data volume allocation and EBS volumes for root volume allocation, and an all EBS architecture, which is of similar properties. As you can see in this example, we've done a pricing exercise through Migration Advisor that demonstrates savings of 33%. One can also drill down into the savings in detail, understand the exact calculation and the cost categories, and actually assess the implication of each category and how do we derive the actual the actual cost benefit of FSx for ONTAP. An additional section of the review plan phase is a section demonstrating the FSx for ONTAP detailed configuration for this specific deployment. We have the highlights here at the initial card, and one can also drill down into the actual properties of FSx for ONTAP, take into impression the capacity allocation segmentation between FSx for ONTAP SSD storage capacity and FSx for ONTAP capacity pool capacity. The deployment types suggested for this configuration, throughput and SSD IOPS level recommendation, and some additional capacity headroom value. There's also a detailed pricing breakdown of the FSx for ONTAP pricing, in which you can see where does the FSx ONTAP cost is derived from, and what are the main cost categories of FSx for ONTAP in this specific configuration. Additionally, we have all of the solution design assumption and calculation assumption that we're doing documented in line within the actual plan. One can review all of the assumptions that we're taking, all the calculation factors that we're bringing into play, and also get into the relevant AWS documentation references that we rely on. And there's, of course, a standard disclaimer around the configuration. Once finished, a user can also save the plan for further reference, export it into his laptop and share with others via offline mechanisms if he doesn't want to save it into Workload Factory. Download a detailed PDF report specifying the actual plan, or download a very detailed migration plan showing the VM to FSx allocation and a detailed volume allocation and volume class allocation derived within the migration plan. Having said that, I've quickly reviewed all of the quick mode properties, and now I'll hand it over to Richard to go on detail mode. Richard, stage is yours.
Thanks. Hey, thanks, Ido. Very good quick overview. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So as Ido had mentioned, right, he went through the quick assessment. And so I'm going to spend some time going through the detailed planning. It's very similar. If you see across the top here, right, we're going to have the same steps: choose, prepare, scope your move, classify the data that's going to be moved, package it up, right, based upon recommendations that we give, and then review that overall plan. So those steps are going to stay the same. But what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and use a more detailed input tool, right, to get the real data, including performance data. I also wanted to highlight while I'm on the screen that we can also import a plan, right? And so at the end of Ido's presentation, he was like, oh, you can export the plan. Well, if I was someone else, right, he could hand me that plan, and then I could import it and look at it myself this way, right, and do further planning. So, but obviously I'm not going to do that for this. I'm going to go forward with the detailed planning. And when we get this first step of prepare, I just want to highlight on the first, just start on the right-hand side over here, the code box. The code box is really an important piece of Workload Factory across many, we said at the beginning, right, it does databases, it does many other things, it does deployments. Code box is kind of our key thing for infrastructure as code, because that's the way most people want to operate in the cloud. And so what we have over here is a PowerShell script that you can look at, and you can copy it, and you can download it, either one, you can do it either way. And this is a PowerShell-based script that you can run in your VMware environment to capture detailed information about your VMware environment, including historic performance data. And within this code box here, it even has like the exact step-by-step of how you would actually implement this. So it should be very easy to run in your environment. And I saw something about VMC as well in one of the questions. This can also run on a VMC environment. If you're looking to migrate from VMC, it's really the same process whether you're coming from VMC to native AWS or whether you're coming from an on-premises VMware to native AWS with FSxN, right? So either way, you can get this data for either of those potential moves. So the first thing I'll do, though, is that this has been run in an environment. I'm going to upload a file that contains all of that data. And the first thing you notice is when I load this file in, it's going to give me a quick high-level view. how many VMs are there? Are they powered on? They powered off? They're any suspended? What's the provisioned and the utilized capacity? Right. So that's the quick synopsis of what's in that file. Again, once we want to start moving forward, we do have to select our region. This one would be, there's, as he mentioned, as Ido had mentioned, right, there's a couple reasons for that. We need to know what FSXN flavors are available because, now that we have real performance data, we're going to have to map that performance data and tie it into an FSXN SKU and to make sure that that particular one is available within the region you're choosing. Also, this only shows regions that actually have FSXN, which is a large percentage of AWS regions, but not all. So if you don't see yours here, then that means it's not supported. So once we have those two steps done, then we're going to look at a little bit more about how we want to do this migration, right? And one of the first things you have to choose is whether you want to use provisioned or utilized storage, right? We're reading that out from the data. Utilize you might do if you're doing some type of right sizing. For this first pass through the demo, I'm going to use provisioned. The next important thing is the average data reduction ratio. We put on here is 33%. That's what we see, right? A lot. Obviously, NetApp's been doing VMware for a long time, and that's what we generally see across our estates. Obviously, there can be differences, and so we have a nice little button here that helps you decide if that's the right percentage for you or not. So let's just say, actually the majority of my VM storage capacity is used by databases. All right, well, I'll select that. And then with that, we know that we're actually probably going to see like 20% because databases don't get quite the same efficiencies. So there's some other options in there, but that's ones we can look at there. So I'm going to set mine still for 33%. Another thing is with Workload Factory, we're always trying to give best practices. And the best practice here is the headroom, right? You generally want to keep 25% headroom availability. That will allow you to have an easier organic growth, room to operate, as well as to have space for snapshots. And that's another thing that we turn on by default. Of course, you can enable or disable this depending on what your use case is for how you might want to use snapshots or backups. But in most enterprise environments, you're going to have snapshots enabled because you want to be able to go back in time with your VMs to recover previous data. So we take all that into account and put those best practices in the flow. But again, we give you the ability to change or remove that. So I'm going to go to the next step now. Okay, so now I'm on the scope, and this is basically which VMs do we want to migrate. And so as we see here, there's some different options here. The first pass through, we're saying, hey, you know what? If it's powered off, you might not be interested in migrating. It's probably maybe not in use. So we select the powered on. But obviously, if that's not your case, you can change this to powered off as well. We can also drill down on your SDDC, right? I only want to look at ones for this plan for moving for this particular SDDC. The other ones, I'm not moving yet, right? So you can filter along those lines as well. And also even down to the cluster level. So for now, I'm doing powered on. Obviously, you can select individual VMs as well. You can also get a little bit more information about your particular VMs. So you could do, you know what? I'd like to see what the OS is, right, of these VMs I'm moving. Okay, this is CentOS, this is SUSE Linux, all the way down to Windows, Microsoft Windows Server, right? So you can see all this detail as well. So just nice pieces of data that we're providing for you. Once you've done the proper scoping and you know what you want to move, then we'll go on to the next page, which is to do the actual classification of the data. Also here you can just see, how many VMs we've selected and what's the actual selected capacity out of the total capacity that we have. Obviously, we turned on power on, right? We'll see that a larger percentage here. Oh, sorry, powered off. Okay, so now we're getting into the classification of the data. And we can quickly see here at the top, right, we have 544 gigabytes of provision capacity, right, that we're looking to move across 276 VMs. And we discovered 428 VMDKs, right, volumes. And we also have the average IOPS and the aggregated throughput, right, that we see across this whole entire environment. The next thing is kind of a critical piece, than what Ido alluded to earlier, and that is how are we going to move these VMs? What types of storage classes are we moving the data to once we decide to migrate it into FSx for ONTAP? And so what we have is the ability to say, hey, we read this performance data from those VMware tools, right? Do we have performance optimized volumes, right? Oh, we do. We have 2 volumes, and usually that's around 5,000 IOPS or higher, right? We'll categorize as performance ones. Excuse me. And then capacity optimized is basically the other end, right? Maybe 100 IOPS or lower. So we have that, and we can see that, hey, we've got a nice little chart here that shows, hey, most of these are in this kind of big fat middle, which are the standard volumes, but we do have some performance optimized and some capacity optimized. And the important thing here is if we're taking performance optimized ones, then we're taking that into account on how we migrate it, where we migrate it, and what the overall footprint will be based on that. So with a performance optimized volume, we're going to want to have that running on the SSD tier, right? We're not going to want that going off to the capacity tier. So we set ONTAP layer, parameters, right, that will help keep that data on the SSD tier, and that's our tiering policy. And so for performance tier, we're going to set, hey, only snapshot only. All this data we want to keep on the hot tier. Even though it's cheaper on the capacity tier, we want to keep it on the hot tier, right? And so we'll take that into account when we do the planning. And it's kind of the opposite for capacity optimized volumes. For those, we're saying, hey, we know this data doesn't need to be super performant. We can access it from the capacity tier, no problem whatsoever. So for those, we set the tiering policy for the volumes that those are going to move to, right, to be the all tiering policy, which basically means, hey, let's move it all up to the capacity tier and save some money. Everything else that I said was like in the fat middle, right, are standardized volumes, and those tend to be ones that we're just going to set the auto tiering policy, which basically just means that the data will stay on the hot SSD tier, right, until approximately 31 days. And after 31 days, then that data will move up to the capacity tier. And that is a configurable setting, right? If whatever in your environment, 31 days was not, you didn't think was sufficient. So we can change all that. Again, as Ido had mentioned before, right, we're going to move 152 volumes. These are the data volumes, the data VMDKs into FSX for ONTAP. And we're going to move 276. These are the OS disk, right? The OS VMDKs into EBS, because that's like the best practice. So that's this breakdown is shown here. And obviously, even though a lot of, OS volumes, the size tends to be a lot smaller. We usually see a lot more space for the large data footprint, right, that we're going to move. And if you want to get a more detailed look, you can say, hey, here's the volumes we migrated to FSX, and here's the ones that we migrated to EBS. We're reading all that out by reading the data and understanding what that data is that's coming to us. You can also add additional parameters here, or columns, right? If you want to say, hey, what are the average IOPS, right, of one of these VMs that I'm moving, you can add that on here as well. You can also filter on the class, like, you know what, I just want to look at the performance optimized. You can just drill down on those. And obviously, as you see here, these performance optimized VMs only have a couple, right? But they're doing above 5,000 IOPS. So that makes sense that that's how we categorize them as performance. Okay, so once you've done all that, you're happy with your classification and you understand everything that's moving, then you can click next and we'll go into our packaging. So now what the Workload Factory has done is taken all that information and now packaged these VMDKs to be moved to different into FSX and GP3, right, for the OS disk. And so we see the complete plan here, and it lays out FSX for ONTAP systems. In this particular case, it actually splits it across 2 due to some of the part of the headroom that we need, and doing all these provisioned size volumes, we need a little bit more footprint. But this takes into account all of the criteria, right? It takes into account the performance requirements. It takes into account what SKUs are available. It takes into account the IOPS and the throughput, as well as how many volumes can exist on a particular FSX for ONTAP system. So it takes all of that and creates a detailed plan. At this highest level here, we can quickly see some of the savings that we're going to get from this. So the estimated savings from the capacity tier, we can see right here is 113 terabytes, right? That savings by putting capacity tier, we're not having to house on the SSD tier, which will make your costs go lower. Also, we can see that we get an estimated data reduction of 77 terabytes. Again, assuming those reduction ratios of 33%, that's the type of reduction ratio we'll see, and the savings we'll see by having a smaller SSD footprint. So you can break this down for each of the systems. We try to obviously split it pretty evenly if we're having multiple systems. And again, you can then look at all the volumes in detail as part of this, what their volume paths are, what their provision capacity, utilized capacity, all of those things. Okay. And so now we've packaged it all up. We've seen how it's doing. It's creating these FSx for ONTAP systems to house this data as it migrates. And then we come to the big shebang, right? And this is where we can see, hey, does this plan make sense, right? Are we going to leverage FSx for ONTAP as part of your migration plans, right? And obviously, for most customers, cost is always big, right? And so what we're seeing here is that with using FSx for ONTAP, we're going to see a 44% savings as compared to doing EBS volumes only cost estimate, right? And these cost estimates are coming from AWS, right? We're using a public AWS API to get this data about what these costs are, right? So this is not, this is using actual live data, current point in time data, right? It's not historical data, it's current data. And so we're getting this value. And again, we can break this down in more detail to see exactly, all the details of where this is coming from, how much capacity headroom we have, what's our predicted snapshot deltas, root volume, aggregate volume capacity. It's all in here, so you can take a deep dive into all the information that we provided and go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it makes sense for you. So that's this part of the plan. And then what we also you can look at here is the actual configuration that we're suggesting for your Amazon for FSx for ONTAP system. And so we can see we have two different ones. We select the region. We can say how much is going to be at the SSD storage capacity, how much is going to be in the capacity pool. Also the performance information, right, that we gathered before, right? We're saying, hey, we're having these, megabytes per second throughput capacity, and we're having these amount of IOPS. And if you see here, right, if we're looking at throughput capacity, at first you're like, recommend a minimum of 54 megabytes per second. Well, why am I using a 512 megabytes per second FSx for ONTAP system? Well, the reason is because we have a high amount of IOPS with this particular workload that we read in. And in order to drive a certain amount of IOPS, you need a 512 megabytes FSx in to drive those IOPS more than just the actual throughput capacity. So again, we take all that into account to give you the best practices and one that will work for you like moving forward. And then here we have the total estimated cost for each of the different layers, right? For the SSD layer, for the capacity pool layer. And as Ido had mentioned before, right, we also have all the assumptions, right, that we have about this, and you can definitely read through this to make sure that those assumptions make sense for your particular planning. Before I go on, the last thing that's kind of nice about this planning tool is that we can quickly go back and try another, right? Hey, instead of, let me see what this looked like. I've got this data read in, but maybe instead of doing provision, I want to, do a little bit of right sizing. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do, thin provisioning of everything, and I want to only really look at the utilized data that's coming across. That's what I want to plan for. So step right back through these steps, don't have to change anything else. It calculates it again. And you say, okay, well, if I'm going to look at the utilized data, right, then I'm going to have a different configuration in the end, right, because I'm moving less data. And in this case, it actually moves it down from 2 FSxN systems to 1 FSx for ONTAP system, because you're moving less data, and you'll also see your lower overall price for your total solution. And then the last thing that we can do here is we can obviously set, once we've got all this data, we can save the plan. We can download an Excel file, right, that really has all the detailed information, right, that we would want in here about, what are we migrating, what VMs, where, right? And this type of file can be a very good input, right? What's the FSx for ONTAP system, what's the source VM, right, where it is, what's the DC it was in, what's revisioned. Everything that we have in here is in this detailed CSV file. So you can take that file and then you can hand it, use that for planning for the actual migration itself, right? Feeding that into other tools that can help you perform the actual migration. Okay, and I think with that, I think that's what I wanted to cover. I'm going to hand it back to Ido at this point. And Danny. Don't forget Danny.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Ido, for a comprehensive demo, really getting to just really showed us in a very thorough way the solution and all the points. Let's go back to the deck and try to understand what next. So we've mentioned RV tools. So run RV tools to collect the relevant information, which is relevant to you, of course. Then you can sign up to Workload Factory. Run the VMware Migration Advisor that we just saw. Remember, step 2 and step 3, both of them are free of charge. You don't spend a cent, and no credentials are required, so you don't even need to trust us. Next step is, once again, using the configuration and the recommendations from Workload Factory, you can deploy from BlueXP Workload Factory the FSx front app on your AWS account. And last but not least, you can migrate VM using the supported tools. What are the takeaways now that we're coming to a close? Essentially, we can the Migration Advisor complements the overall AWS assessment process, helping you to get a high-level solution design and identify potential cost-saving opportunities. Making the migration planning a bit simple, and hopefully with some automated analysis, we can help you to classify the storage, assignment, etc. But it's based on industry best practices. And last but not least, realize cost reduction opportunities with FSx front app. And of course, we don't want to come without compromising resilience, security, and performance. And now I'll hand it back to Ido and Richard, because I do believe there are some questions left unanswered. So Ido, over to you.
Yeah, just looking in. So we have a couple of questions here. One of those questions is, how long will it take to migrate about 300 TB of data? So actually the answer for this question is it depends. And migration is actually, or migration process is designed and derived from a couple of different elements which are independent of the migrated capacity. So one should look at the VM count and the actual business application relying on those VMs. How easy would it be to get some downtime for those business application, and how consolidated will this downtime be? Again, the capacity actually does reflect on data migration paces, and it might be that specific intervals should be crafted based on the actual migrated capacity. So data transfer and network resource usage would be optimized. I guess for such a migration in such an order of magnitude, you'll be using direct connect. So in terms of transfer rates, you should be able to accompany this amount of capacity. But again, due to the grouping to different VMs, the actual application, some dependencies, some maybe network dependencies, and additional complexities that lies within the business and the migration project management, it might take additional time to actually migrate the data. Therefore, to actually classify the migration process, you will have to go to a bit more complex sizing and a deeper dive. An additional question here is, can you put FSx instances in different daisy regions? And yeah, the answer is yes. An FSx can reside in most AWS regions, while also deployed in one or more availability zones. So FSxN has a single availability zone or a multi-availability zone deployment type, which can actually be deployed on most of AWS regions. FSx does have two versions. So FSx Generation 2 has been announced in AWS reInvent a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. And it's available in a couple of the AWS regions. FSx also has different throughput and IOPS SKUs available in different deployment regions, but the service is available in most regions, also in GovCloud regions. Having said GovCloud, I take it to the next question here. Does this support GovCloud regions? So the answer is yes, FSx can be deployed in some GovCloud regions, and you can run an assessment on those. From a Workload Factory perspective, you won't be able to select directly a GovCloud region, but you can select a region which is similar to GovCloud in the deployment properties, and you will get the exact same output as you were deploying it on a GovCloud region. And FSxN does support GovCloud, therefore you can deploy and migrate your VMware environment in a GovCloud region. Any plans to output Terraform scripts? Excellent question. So Workload Factory does have an infrastructure as code component that can complement the deployment process. So actually, once receiving the migration plan, you can go ahead and deploy your FSx for ONTAP using infrastructure as code. There are different deployment schemes. Some of the flows currently support Terraform today. Terraform is a roadmap item from all others. Some of those today can be done with CloudFormation and will support Terraform in the future. We do also have a Terraform provider, a new Terraform provider for FSx that can complement Workload Factory solution.
Yeah, we support Terraform right now, right, for the basic FSx ONTAP deployment, right? So if you took the outputs of this and you say, hey, I know what I want from this plan, you can go right over to the Workload Factory, put that data into the Workload Factory storage tool, right, and say, show me the Terraform, and then you could download that Terraform and execute it right from there.
Correct, you are, Richard.
Yes, yeah. That is correct. I also want to add to that we have a NetApp GitHub that also has that is public and also holds some Terraform plans for evolving FSx for ONTAP and some actions. So that could also be a good reference. And a little bit of addition to the high availability mode of FSx. As Ido said, you can have it either in a single AZ HA, meaning you have 2 nodes within the single AZ. And once again, there are trade-offs. The SLA is understandably not as well because AWS don't recommend deploying on a single AZ. But we also have the multi-AZ, which deploys 2 nodes in different availability zone, and therefore you get a better high availability SLA from 99.9% in the single AZ to 99.99 in the multi-AZ.
One additional question here is, in addition to migrating directly to NetApp ONTAP, what other differences exist between AWS MGN and the NetApp migration tool? So basically, when you're looking at Workload Factory, Workload Factory does the migration planning for cloud migration using FSxN as its target storage. It's a complementary tool to the newly announced AWS Amazon Q Developer Transformation Migration Assessment or any other assessments done within the AWS Migration Hub. Data can be then migrated to FSx for ONTAP using multiple solutions between block storage replication and then format conversion to using third-party tools such as Source Data and River Meadow that can actually do the migration as an orchestrated process, even by leveraging infrastructure as code automations and have the migration done as a programmatic flow. And MGN currently does not support FSx for ONTAP. It does support EBS storage only. And therefore, when migrating to FSx for ONTAP, you can use tools such as Source Data and River Meadow, which are also available, at least River Meadow, at the AWS map program with a very high map level that allows significant funding.
Okay, I think with that, good time to conclude our Q&A. If you still have questions that you have yet to ask or we have yet to answer, don't worry, our people will get back to you after the webinar. Also, a recording and a deck of this webinar will be made available for you. But while we're here, you can also take a look at some of the resource links, and you can also, we encourage you to try Workload Factory through the console. And with that, I'd also like to thank you, Ido, for coming tonight. Thank you, Richard. for coming this morning from the other side of the pond. And thank our chat responders, and thank you for attending the webinar, for asking excellent questions, making this more interactive and more engaging. We hope to see you all on the next webinar. So have a great rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you very much for coming. Good day.